Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're heading to Ontario, Canada to explore the world of paramedic services in the Manitoulin-Sudbury district. We're diving into their deployment plan, a fascinating document that reveals how they managed to deliver timely care across a massive and geographically diverse area. You'll get a glimpse into the intricate system that ensures efficient care for patients in a region where response times can really be a matter of life or death.
It's a complex system for sure. Imagine coordinating emergency response across a region that includes remote islands, vast stretches of wilderness, and bustling city centers, all with their own unique challenges.
That's incredible. So where do we even begin to unpack something this intricate?
Well, the plan kicks off with standby locations, which might sound mundane, but it's actually crucial for ensuring those rapid response times. These locations are strategically scattered throughout the district to minimize travel time when an emergency call comes in.
So are paramedics just sitting around waiting for the next call?
Not exactly. The plan sets specific rules for these standby periods, usually capping them at 2 hours, unless a crew is stationed at one of their main bases. But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
If a designated standby location lacks basic facilities, like washrooms, paramedics are allowed a 15-minute break to relocate to a more suitable spot.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want paramedics stuck in the middle of nowhere without access to basic necessities, especially if they're about to respond to an emergency.
Exactly. It highlights a commitment to the well-being of paramedics, which ultimately translates to better patient care.
Speaking of challenging situations, what happens when local paramedics need backup, say, during a major incident, like a mass casualty event?
That's where allied agency response and mutual aid come into play. They have protocols to call on additional resources from various agencies, like specialized teams from Greater Sudbury Emergency Services, the OPP, or even search and rescue teams, depending on the situation.
So it's like a carefully coordinated network, everyone stepping up to support each other when needed.
Precisely. The plan emphasizes collaboration, recognizing that seamless communication and coordination between agencies are crucial during these high-pressure events.
Now, this next section caught my eye. Advanced Care Paramedic Intercept. It sounds like something out of a medical drama.
It is pretty intriguing. Imagine you're being transported to a hospital, and suddenly a higher level of care is seamlessly integrated into your journey. That's essentially what ACP Intercept is all about.
So it's like a medical upgrade, en route.
Yes. But it's not just a random upgrade. The plan outlines specific criteria that trigger this response. The patient needs to be categorized as a priority 4, or a CTAS 1 or 2. Which are essentially levels of urgency used to determine the severity of a patient's condition.
Those sound pretty serious.
They are. These classifications indicate conditions where an advanced care paramedic's expertise could be crucial. Additionally, the intercept can only happen if the ambulance is more than 10 minutes away from the hospital and the destination is within the city of Greater Sudbury.
I see. So location and severity are both key factors.
Absolutely. And to minimize delays, the Manitoulin-Sudbury paramedics will actually drive the city of Greater Sudbury's vehicle to the hospital after the intercept, allowing the original crew to become available for other calls sooner.
That's really interesting. The plan even outlines specific intercept locations, right?
Yeah. Yes, they thought of everything. It could be anywhere from a provincial park to an MTO yard, as long as it's safe and accessible for both ambulance crews. Of course, they wouldn't want patients being transferred on the shoulder of a busy highway.
That's safety first, of course. Now, let's shift gears to situations where even ground transport might not be fast enough. Same ambulance.
This is where things get really interesting. The criteria for requesting an air ambulance involve what they call the 30-minute rule. If response time or transport time for ground paramedics exceeds 30 minutes and the patient's condition is considered an obvious and immediate threat, an air ambulance can be called in.
So in those critical moments, every minute truly does count.
You got it. But here's the fascinating part. Each paramedic actually has the authority to request an air ambulance based on their professional judgment, even if the 30-minute rule isn't technically met.
That's a lot of responsibility resting on their shoulders.
It is. But it speaks volumes about the level of trust placed in these highly trained professionals. They're empowered to make potentially life-saving decisions right there in the field.
It's amazing how this plan empowers paramedics to make critical decisions. Now, I'm curious about the challenges of interfacility transfers and resource utilization. How do they balance emergency coverage with the need to transport patients between facilities for specialized care?
That's a key consideration in any emergency medical service.
Right, yeah.
Especially in a geographically diverse region like this, you can't leave communities vulnerable. But patients also need to be moved quickly and efficiently to receive the appropriate care.
Sounds like a logistical tightrope walk.
You could say that. The plan addresses this with specific rules for non-urgent transfers. These can only happen during a limited window from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday and require approval from the paramedic superintendent. This ensures they're not pulling resources away during peak emergency hours or without proper oversight.
So there's a lot of control in place to make sure those non-urgent transfers don't impact emergency response.
Absolutely. They even have limits on the number of vehicles from each area that can be used for non-urgent transfers simultaneously.
Yeah.
For instance, the northern area, the La Cloche-Manitoulin area, and Sudbury East can each only have one vehicle out for this purpose at a time.
It's a bit like a giant chess game, moving pieces around strategically to ensure every area is covered.
Bro.
What about those priority 3 and 4 interfacility transfers, which I imagine are more urgent?
Good question. These are cases that need prompt attention, but aren't as immediately life-threatening as a priority 1 or 2. The plan directs the Central Ambulance Communications Center, or CKCC, to contact Orange, the air ambulance service, first for these types of transfers.
So they try to leverage air transport whenever possible to free up ground resources for emergencies.
Exactly. If Orange can't handle the transfer, then it falls to Manitoulin and Sudbury paramedic services. However, there are safeguards in place. If a priority 3 transfer would leave a community short on emergency coverage, they can delay it for up to 6 hours to either reposition ambulances or wait for a shift change.
That makes sense. They're really committed to having enough resources available at all times. The level of detail in this plan is impressive. It even includes specialized protocols for handling specific emergencies.
Yes, the plan outlines detailed procedures for handling cases like STEMI, a type of serious heart attack, acute stroke, and major trauma. They recognize that different emergencies require tailored responses.
So they're not just reacting, they have pre-planned strategies to ensure the most effective care, no matter the situation.
Precisely. For instance, in a STEMI case, the plan emphasizes bypassing local emergency departments and transporting the patient directly to the cardiac catheterization lab at Health Sciences North in Sudbury, where they can receive specialized treatment faster.
That's fascinating. It makes sense to get the patient to the most appropriate facility as quickly as possible.
Exactly. They also have streamlined communication protocols, so the receiving facility is ready for the patient's arrival. Now, this level of coordination extends to diagnostic department notification as well.
What does that involve?
When transporting a patient for diagnostic testing, paramedics have designated check-in points along their route. For example, when they're 25 minutes away from hospitals like Timmins and District Hospitals or Health Sciences North, they contact CACC. Then CKCC relays the estimated time of arrival to the specific department within the hospital that will be receiving the patient.
It's almost like a choreographed dance, ensuring everyone is informed and prepared. At each step of the process, it sounds like a lot of work behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly.
It certainly is. Now, another often overlooked but crucial aspect of the plan is medical escorts and repatriation. This section deals with situations where interfacility transfers require additional medical support beyond what paramedics can provide.
Why would an escort be necessary?
It depends on the patient's condition. Some patients may need medication, monitoring, or even interventions that fall outside the paramedic's scope of practice during transport.
So the escort provides an extra layer of specialized care.
Precisely. The plan makes it clear that the sending facility is responsible for providing this escort. If they refuse, CKC is instructed to immediately notify the paramedic superintendent so they can address the situation. There are also very specific rules when it comes to medical escorts for mental health patients.
It seems they've thought of everything. What about repatriation?
That refers to getting the paramedics and their ambulance back to their designated coverage area as quickly as possible after a transfer so they're available for other emergencies.
Minimizing downtime and maximizing coverage, that's a recurring theme throughout this plan.
Absolutely. The plan even sets a target of 30 minutes for return to readiness, which includes things like restocking the ambulance, cleaning equipment, and completing documentation. Every minute counts.
Presumption's time, I imagine. Ambulance offload delay is a major concern. Those delays at hospitals can really impact the system's overall efficiency.
You're right, it's a common issue in healthcare systems.
Yeah.
Across the board. The plan outlines steps to minimize these delays, starting with proactive communication.
What does that look like in practice?
When CACC books an interfacility transfer, they contact the receiving hospital to confirm that they're expecting the patient and ready to take over care without delay.
So clear communication is key.
Absolutely. But they also have procedures in place for when delays do occur. If a crew arrives at a hospital and can't immediately transfer their patient, they contact CACC via radio to report an offload delay. Then CSCC notifies the paramedic superintendent, who will work with the hospital to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. It's a collaborative effort.
It's reassuring to know they have systems in place to address those inevitable hiccups.
Right. Now, let's discuss a situation that might seem counterintuitive, but can actually be quite efficient under the right circumstances. Multiple patient transfer.
Multiple patients in one ambulance. That sounds tricky.
It can be,
Hmm.
but the plan allows for it in certain situations,
Yeah.
always with patient safety in mind. The paramedics on scene have the authority to decide whether transporting multiple patients together is appropriate.
So they're making those judgment calls in the field.
They are. They have to assess the patient's conditions, the nature of their illnesses or injuries, their level of stability, and whether their treatments are compatible.
Wow, that's a lot to consider.
It is. They're trained to make those difficult decisions, balancing the need to utilize resources efficiently with the paramount importance of patient safety.
Yeah.
And they're accountable for those decisions.
Yeah.
If they decide against a multiple patient transfer, they have to document their reasoning.
It's incredible how much responsibility paramedics have in this system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to their expertise and training.
This deep dive into the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB Paramedic Services Deployment Plan has been fascinating. We've covered so much ground, from those strategic standby locations to the intricate dance of interfacility transfers and specialized protocols.
It's like peeling back the layers of a complex machine, revealing all the interconnected parts that work together to deliver timely and effective care.
You mentioned earlier that this document is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Imagine all the other training manuals,
Mm.
protocols, and procedures that aren't included here, plus the constant behind-the-scenes work, from vehicle maintenance to supply chain management. That keeps this operation running smoothly.
It really emphasizes how much we rely on these essential services, often without even realizing it.
I think that's a key takeaway from this deep dive. We dial 911 and we expect help to arrive quickly and efficiently.
Mhm.
But we rarely think about the intricate system that makes that possible.
It's a bit like flipping a switch and expecting the light to come on without considering the complex electrical grid that powers it.
Exactly. And this exploration has revealed just how much planning, coordination, and expertise go into providing pre-hospital care in a region as vast and diverse as the Manitoulin-Sudbury District.
Okay. We've dissected this plan pretty thoroughly. What stands out to you as the most insightful or perhaps surprising aspect of this system?
For me, it's the level of autonomy
Hmm.
and trust that's placed in paramedics. From determining the need for air ambulance transport to making those tough calls about multiple patient transfers, they're empowered to make critical decisions based on their professional judgment.
I agree. And what struck me is the emphasis on collaboration, not just within the paramedic service itself, but also with external agencies like Orange and hospitals.
It's a reminder that providing emergency medical care is a team effort involving a network of dedicated professionals working together to assure the best possible outcome for patients.
So what does this all mean for the listener tuning in today?
Well, it means that when you dial 911 in the Manitoulin-Sudbury District, you can have confidence that a highly trained and dedicated team is ready to respond, backed by a well-structured system designed to handle a wide range of emergencies.
It's reassuring to know that such a robust system is in place, ensuring timely and efficient care for everyone, regardless of where they live within the district.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the commitment of everyone involved in delivering these essential services, from the paramedics on the front lines to the dispatchers coordinating resources behind the scenes.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave our listeners with something to ponder. This plan provides a snapshot of how the system operates today, but what do you think the future holds for paramedic services?
That's a great question to consider. Technology is constantly evolving, and I'm sure we'll see advancements in telemedicine, data analytics, and even autonomous vehicles, playing a role in shaping the future of emergency medical care.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities. And it's a reminder that learning, like the work of these dedicated paramedics, is a continuous journey.
I couldn't agree more. There's always more to discover and explore, both in the world of emergency medical services and beyond.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Manitoulin Sudbury DSB paramedic services.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
Until next time, keep diving deeper.
All right, so today we are going to be taking a deep dive into the Manitoulin Sudbury District's Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
Sounds good.
I know deployment plan might not sound like the most exciting thing in the world,
Right.
and I'm telling you, this is really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So the district itself is
Yeah.
really a mix of a lot of different kinds of geography.
Mhm.
You've got mainland, you've got islands.
Right.
So this plan has to figure out how to make sure that
Mhm.
people can get help no matter where they are.
Exactly. And it's actually
about-
even more than just ambulances, right?
Right.
This plan lays out how to coordinate all kinds of emergency responders.
Oh.
So you're talking paramedics, you're talking volunteer firefighters, you're talking the OPP.
Wow.
It's really this whole network that has to work together seamlessly.
So what happens when they don't have a lot of resources? Like what happens when they're down to one ambulance for the entire district?
Well, they actually planned for that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
The plan says to put that one ambulance in Little Current,
Okay.
which makes sense if you think about it geographically.
Right.
It's a pretty central location. Gives you the best possible coverage if you've only got that one resource to work with.
Okay. You mentioned a network of responders earlier.
Yeah.
What exactly does that look like in practice?
Well, the plan uses this tiered response system.
Okay.
Basically, as fewer ambulances become available, the plan starts shifting gears.
Okay, so at full capacity, you've got 5 ambulances, right?
Exactly. They're positioned strategically throughout the district. But then as that number drops, things start to change.
So like what kind of changes?
Well, first, they might start delaying non-urgent transfers between hospitals, things that can wait a little bit.
Okay, right. Makes sense.
Then they start repositioning ambulances based on what they call zones.
Zones.
Yeah, it's kind of like they divide the district into these pie slices,
Okay.
each one representing a specific geographic area. It helps make sure that even with fewer ambulances, the coverage stays as balanced as possible.
Okay, so if you're down to, say, 3 ambulances, then what?
Then the plan starts to get really laser focused. Those ambulances would be directed to specific locations like Espanola and Manitowoc.
I'm guessing those locations weren't just chosen randomly.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
They use data to figure out where the need is most likely to be. It takes into account population density, geography, and the likelihood of certain types of emergencies happening in those areas.
Okay, so Espanola, that's a major population center.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Manitowoc, that gives you pretty good access to a large chunk of Manitoulin Island.
Okay, so it's not just about proximity. It's about being proactive and figuring out where the need is going to be.
Exactly. But what if even 3 ambulances aren't enough? That's where the other first responders come in.
Okay, now we're getting into some interesting territory, I think.
This is where it gets really fascinating.
Okay,
The plan utilizes all kinds of partners, not just paramedics.
like who?
Well, you've got emergency first response teams. They call them EFRTs. You've got volunteer fire departments. You've even got the OPP. They often get to the scene first. And a lot of officers even carry AEDs now.
Wow, so even before an ambulance gets there, there's a chance that someone's already providing care.
Exactly.
Right.
It's all about bridging that gap between the 911 call and the arrival of paramedics.
That's incredible.
And they have these specific agreements with all these different fire departments.
Like which ones?
Well, you've got a Sigenac, you've got On Deck Omnicaning, Baldwin, and a whole bunch of others. Each one has a role to play depending on what they're equipped to do and where they're located.
So it sounds like a very carefully orchestrated response.
It really is. Like everyone knows their part and how to work together.
And the response times for all these different agencies, I'm
Yeah.
guessing that must vary quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you've got the Espanola Fire Department. They aim for a 10-minute response time.
Yeah.
Then you've got the Whitefish Falls Willisville Volunteer Fire Department. They might take up to 30 minutes depending on where the call is.
Right, because the distances involved are so different.
Exactly, and that's why the tiered response system is so important. The plan has to take all those variations into account.
Right.
The goal is to always have someone on scene providing care as quickly as possible.
So it's not just about getting an ambulance there. It's about having someone there, period.
You got it. It's about understanding that every situation is different, And you need a system that can adapt.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about who responds to these emergencies,
Right.
but what about the actual care that's provided,
Well, this is where the plan gets even more sophisticated.
especially when it comes to things like strokes and heart attacks?
Right, exactly. Those are time-sensitive situations.
Yeah.
And getting to a hospital quickly can be a challenge in a district this large.
So how do they handle that?
Well, for stroke patients, they follow the Northeastern Ontario stroke strategy.
Okay.
Imagine the district divided into 5 regions, each one linked to a specific stroke center.
Wait, so you're saying that depending on where the stroke happens, the patient might not be taken to the closest hospital?
That's exactly right. It's about getting them to the right specialists as fast as possible.
Wow.
So let's say you're on Manitoulin Island. You're most likely going to Sudbury.
Okay.
But if you're further east, it might be North Bay.
That makes sense.
And if you're further west along Highway 17, west of Highway 108, you're going to Sault Ste. Marie.
Okay, I see. So they've really thought about this carefully.
Oh, yeah. They have to consider not just the location of the stroke, but also what each hospital is equipped to handle.
Right, because those stroke centers have specialized equipment and staff.
Exactly. They can do things like thrombolysis, which is that clot-busting medication.
That can really make a difference.
It can be a lifesaver if it's given quickly enough. So what the paramedics do in the field can directly impact the patient's chances of getting those treatments.
Wow, it's amazing how every decision they make is connected to that bigger picture.
It really is. It shows that emergency care is about so much more than just responding to a call. It's about understanding the whole system and how all the pieces fit together.
I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah, there's still a lot more to unpack.
But we'll save that for next time.
I can't wait.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Me too.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon with more from the Manitoulin-Sudbury District's Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
Yeah,
That whole stroke strategy thing is really fascinating.
it is, isn't it?
Like, who would have thought that where you have a stroke determines what hospital you go to?
It really shows how much thought they put into this plan.
Definitely.
Mhm.
So, I wanted to circle back to those EFRTs.
Yeah,
We mentioned Cockburn Island earlier,
right,
being accessible only by boat or helicopter,
right.
which triggers an automatic Orange Air ambulance request.
It's incredible, right?
That is amazing.
Right?
But Cockburn Island isn't the only place with unique challenges.
No, you've got Tacoma too.
Oh, right.
That whole township has these really dispersed settlements, and the roads aren't always the best.
So even though both of those EFRTs are trained to provide that same initial level of care, their ability to get to the scene quickly can vary.
Exactly. And that's why having this multi-layered response system is so important.
Right. It's about having backups and backups for the backups.
Exactly. You need to have a plan for every possible scenario.
And speaking of backups, what about the OPP?
Oh, yeah. They're a huge part of this whole system, too.
I mean, we talked about them carrying ADs.
Right.
But they do a lot more than that.
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure. Especially in those areas where ambulances might have trouble getting to.
Like the water surrounding Manitoulin Island.
Exactly. Or even all those snowmobile trails they have in the winter.
Right.
So the plan actually incorporates the OPP's marine and snowmobile units.
Makes sense.
They're the ones who can navigate those areas and get to people when no one else can.
It's amazing how they've adapted this plan to fit all the specific challenges of the region.
It really is. It shows how committed they are to making sure that everyone has access to care no matter what.
Okay, so this plan is obviously meticulously crafted.
It is.
But how do they actually keep it all running smoothly? Like, who's making sure that all these pieces are in place?
Well, that's where staffing and resource allocation come in.
Right, because you can have the best plan in the world, but if you don't have the people to make it happen.
Exactly. And that's a big challenge in a district this large.
Especially when you consider how few paramedics there are to cover such a vast area.
It's definitely a balancing act. They have to figure out how to provide adequate coverage with the resources they have.
We saw in the appendix that the staffing models vary from station to station.
Right.
Some places have paramedics on site 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
while others rely on an on-call system.
Exactly.
I imagine there are pros and cons to each approach.
Oh, for sure. On-site staffing, that means you've got someone there immediately.
Right.
But it can be tough to justify that in areas where you don't get a lot of calls.
I can see that.
On-call staffing, that gives you more flexibility, but it also means there's a chance of a delay.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between immediate coverage and efficient use of resources.
Exactly. And the plan seems to do that by putting on-site staffing in the higher population areas,
Makes sense.
places like Espanola, Little Current,
Right.
and then using on-call staffing for the more remote locations.
Okay, so they're constantly having to adjust and adapt based on the needs of each community.
Exactly. It's a constant game of chess trying to figure out where the pieces need to be.
And the stakes are pretty high.
They are. It's about making sure that people get the help they need when they need it.
You know, we talked about those specialized protocols for stroke and heart attack patients earlier.
We did.
I think it's worth diving back into that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing how much thought they put into those time-sensitive situations.
It really is. They understand that every minute counts.
So let's recap those 5 regions for stroke care.
All right, so imagine you've got this map of the district divided into 5 zones. If the stroke happens in the area around Highway 144, south of Highway 560, or on Manitoulin Island, the patient goes to Sudbury.
Okay.
No, even though there might be hospitals closer to those areas, they decided that it's better to get those patients to a specialized stroke center.
Right, because Sudbury has the equipment and the staff to handle those cases.
Exactly, and the same logic applies to the other zones.
So, like, what are the other zones?
Well, if the stroke happens further east, near Highway 17, east of Verner, they go to North Bay.
Okay,
Further west, along Highway 17, west of Highway 108, Sault Ste. Marie.
I see.
And then you've got Chapleau and Kirkland Lake. They go to Timmins and Temiskaming, respectively.
So no matter where you are in the district, they've figured out the best place to get you to.
That's the goal.
Okay.
It's about maximizing those chances of a positive outcome.
And it's not just about getting them to the right hospital, it's about making sure that the hospital knows they're coming.
Exactly. The paramedics are in constant communication with the receiving hospital, letting them know what time the stroke happened, what the symptoms are, all that vital information.
So the stroke team is ready to go the second that ambulance pulls up.
Exactly. It's a well-oiled machine designed to save lives.
And the STEMI bypass protocol that works the same way, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
So if they suspect a STEMI heart attack,
They bypass the local hospitals and take the patient straight to a cardiac catheterization lab.
right, where they can do things like angioplasty and stenting.
Exactly. Those procedures can make a huge difference in those situations.
It's incredible how much coordination goes into all of this.
It really is. It shows how dedicated everyone is to providing the best possible care.
It's not just about reacting to emergencies. It's about being proactive and thinking ahead.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that emergency preparedness isn't just the responsibility of the government.
Right.
It's a community effort.
So what can people do to be more prepared?
Well, first of all, it's about knowing what resources are available in your community,
Okay.
understanding how the system works, who to call in different situations.
Right. And then it's about supporting those local organizations that are on the front lines.
Like fire departments, EFRTs.
Exactly. Those are the people who are out there keeping us safe.
And I think it's important to remember that these are real people who are putting their lives on the line to help others.
Absolutely. They're making sacrifices every day, and we need to show them our appreciation.
Well said. I think this has been a really insightful deep dive so far.
It has.
We've learned a lot about the challenges and the complexities of providing emergency care in a region like this.
It's definitely not easy, but they've done an incredible job of creating a system that works.
And it's not just about responding to emergencies. It's about being prepared and thinking ahead.
Exactly.
So what else have you uncovered that might surprise our listeners?
Well, the plan actually outlines what happens when they've exhausted all their options.
Okay,
Like what happens when they simply don't have the resources to meet the demand.
that's a scary thought.
It is, but they've thought about it and they have a plan in place.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's talk about those situations where they've exhausted all their options. Like, what happens when there just aren't enough resources to go around?
Well, the plan acknowledges that those situations are going to happen sometimes.
Right.
You could have a major weather event, a big accident, multiple emergencies happening at the same time.
So it becomes about making tough decisions.
It does. They have to figure out how to prioritize.
And that's where that tiered response system comes in.
Right, exactly. They have these triggers for escalating the response.
So they start by delaying those non-urgent transfers.
Right. Then they might reposition ambulances.
Okay.
And if all else fails, they can request help from neighboring services.
So it's like a step-by-step process.
It is. They're trying to maximize the impact of whatever resources they have available.
It's like they're trying to prevent the whole system from being overloaded.
Gee, that's a good way to think about it. But what's really interesting is that they don't just say, okay, here's what you do when things get bad.
Right.
They actually lay out the decision-making process.
Oh, so it's about consistency.
Exactly.
Right.
They want to make sure that those tough calls are being made fairly and consistently.
So what kinds of factors do they consider?
Well, they look at the severity of the call,
Mm.
whether there are any alternative resources available,
Right.
and what the potential impact on the patient might be.
So it's a very data-driven approach.
It is. They're trying to take as much of the guesswork out of it as possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with all these plans in place, there must be times when they just can't do it all.
There are. The plan actually acknowledges that.
Really?
Yeah, it says that in those rare situations, they have to be transparent with the public.
So being honest about their limitations.
Exactly. And it's not just about saying, oh, well, we can't help you.
Right.
It's about managing expectations and helping people understand why those limitations exist.
So it's about being proactive and looking for solutions.
Absolutely. They're constantly advocating for more resources, exploring new partnerships,
That's great.
always trying to find ways to improve the system.
I think this deep dive has really opened my eyes to all the complexities of providing emergency care,
It has for me, too.
especially in a region like this.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking, but they've done an amazing job.
So what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's that emergency preparedness is everyone's responsibility.
Right. We can't just rely on the government to take care of everything.
Exactly. We all need to be aware of the resources in our communities and be prepared to act in an emergency.
And we need to support those organizations that are out there on the front lines.
Absolutely. The fire departments, the FRTs, all those groups that are working to keep us safe.
I think that's a great message to end on.
I do too.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring this plan.
It has.
And I think we've all learned a lot about the dedication and the ingenuity of the people who are responsible for keeping the residents of the Manitoulin-Sudbury District safe.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So until next time, stay safe, everyone. And remember, knowledge is power.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're heading north to Ontario, Canada, to the Manitoulin-Sudbury region.
Right.
And we are diving into the world of paramedics.
Cool.
We're going to be looking at the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
Oh, wow.
I'm really excited to see how they deliver emergency care in a region known for its vast distances
Right.
and sometimes remote communities.
Yeah, it's a fascinating document. It's really a playbook for handling a ton of different emergency scenarios.
Absolutely. And one of the first things that jumped out at me was this whole section on multiple patient transfers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, imagine the coordination needed when multiple people need to be transported at the same time.
Oh, for sure.
It seems chaotic, right?
It has the potential to be,
Yeah.
but this plan is all about clear roles and communication.
Yeah.
They really emphasize that.
Yeah.
It lays out exactly what the paramedics need to do, what escorts need to do, how the receiving hospital staff should prepare.
Yeah.
It makes sure everyone is on the same page to keep patients safe, even when things get a little crazy.
Even if there are medical escorts on board, one paramedic is required to stay with the patient in the ambulance
Yeah, that's
at all times. That's pretty impressive.
It is. It just shows how dedicated they are to direct patient care, no
Yeah,
matter what else is going on.
absolutely. Now let's talk about single response units. This one seemed a bit counterintuitive to me at first.
Okay.
Why send a single paramedic when time is of the essence?
I know, it seems odd, right? But think about it from the perspective of someone in a life or death situation,
Yeah.
waiting for help to arrive. Even having one paramedic get there quickly to provide initial care
Okay, yeah.
can make a huge difference. It buys time for the rest of the team to arrive.
I can see that. It's about getting someone there as fast as possible, even if it's just one person initially.
Exactly. And then there's this incredible scenario where, in a really, really critical situation, if there's only one paramedic, a firefighter or a police officer can actually drive the ambulance.
Really? I've never heard of that.
I know, right? It shows how closely these different agencies work together.
Yeah, it's amazing.
They're willing to bend the rules to get people the help they need as fast as possible.
It's all hands on deck. Now let's talk about paramedic response units, or PRUs as they call them.
Okay.
These are basically mini ambulances staffed by a single primary care paramedic.
Yeah, they're kind of like the scouts, you know? They can get to a scene quickly, figure out what's going on, provide initial care while the full transport ambulance is on its way.
The document highlights the Manitoulin PRU, stationed in Little Current. It seems to play a crucial role.
It does, especially on Manitoulin Island, where you have these unique geographical challenges.
Right, I can see that. They need to be flexible to reach everyone.
Exactly. It's a great example of how this plan adapts to the needs of each area.
Yeah. And speaking of adapting, let's move on to Balanced emergency coverage strategies. This is where things get pretty intricate.
Oh, yeah. Imagine a constantly shifting puzzle where they're trying to make sure every community has coverage, even when an ambulance is out on a call.
Okay.
It's like this intricate dance of ambulances moving between Little Current, Wikwemikong, Mindamoya, and Gore Bay.
Wow.
And that PRU we talked about earlier, it plays a key role in filling the gaps.
So they're always thinking a few steps ahead.
They have to. They even have a rule where if an ambulance is going to be unavailable for over an hour,
Oh.
they send another one from a different station to cover that area.
Okay, now I'm really curious about these paramedic superintendents. They sound like the elite forces of the paramedic world.
They are very experienced paramedics, that's for sure, at least at the primary care paramedic level.
So they're not always out on the front lines.
Right. But they can be called in for specific situations, like if there's a delay in response or if their PRU is the closest unit available.
I see. So they're like a strategic reserve, ready to step in when needed.
Yeah, exactly. And they're especially important if a zone is temporarily without an ambulance coverage.
Okay. Now, this roaming strategy confused me a little at first. Shouldn't paramedics be stationed and ready to go?
Well, it's not about paramedics wandering around aimlessly.
Right.
It's more about being visible in the community,
Oh, okay.
building relationships, and promoting public awareness.
So it's a more proactive
Let's-
approach to emergency care.
Exactly. But of course, they still have to stay in communication with the CACC
Right.
and be ready to respond immediately if a call comes in.
Makes sense. Now, the document gets pretty specific with station locations and normal response boundaries.
Yeah, this is where we see the systems organization in action.
They list all these stations under different CACCs, Timmins, Sault Ste. Marie, Sudbury,
Mm.
and they have very detailed boundaries for each station.
Oh yeah, it's all mapped out really carefully. They use landmarks, highways, all sorts of things.
It's like they've divided the entire region into these zones of responsibility.
Exactly. When a call comes in, the dispatcher knows instantly which station should respond.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
For example, the Gogama station covers Highway 144 north to Kinogamisi Lake Road, Highway 144 south to Marquette Lake, Sultan Road west to a secondary road leading south to Ramsey.
Wow.
It's super specific.
They have to be that precise. Every second counts in an emergency.
This plan is really thorough. But what about working with other agencies? I see a section on Allied Agency Incident Standbys.
Right, that's where paramedics can be called upon to support the police or fire services.
So, for example, if the police are responding to a potentially dangerous situation,
Yeah,
but there's no immediate medical emergency, they might request a paramedic to stand by.
exactly. Or if there's a big fire and they need medical personnel on scene, just in case.
It's all about preparedness.
Yeah,
And the CIC plays a key role in coordinating these standbys.
they do. They gather all the important information. Location, reason for request, duration of standby.
Right, so the paramedics know what to expect.
Exactly. They really leave no room for ambiguity.
They've thought of everything, haven't they?
It seems like it. This is a truly comprehensive plan.
This is fascinating stuff. We're only scratching the surface here.
I know, right? There's so much more to unpack.
We're going to need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll delve even deeper into the complexities of this system
All right.
and explore how it tackles those really challenging scenarios. Stay tuned.
I'm ready.
We're back and ready to dig deeper into this paramedic deployment plan.
You know, one of the things that fascinates me is this tiered response program.
Oh, yeah. Tiered response?
It's like they've created a whole toolbox of responses, each one tailored to a specific level of emergency.
Okay, so break that down for me. How do these tiered responses actually work?
So instead of sending a full response to every single call, they assess the situation
Yeah.
and then decide what level of resources are needed.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach?
Exactly. It prevents the system from getting overwhelmed and ensures resources are used efficiently.
Okay, that makes sense. Each agency, like the police, fire department, paramedics, they all have their own criteria for activating these different tiers.
That's right. It helps to keep things coordinated.
Okay, so it's all about matching the response to the specific needs of the situation.
Exactly. It's all about flexibility and having the right tools for the job.
Now, speaking of challenging situations, let's talk about mass casualty incidents. They must require a whole different level of response.
They do. And that's where the Manitoulin Sudbury DSB MCI response section comes in.
Right, the MCI section. They've actually got 3 levels of response depending on the number of patients involved.
Yeah. Level 1 for incidents with 4 to 9 patients, Level 2 for 10 to 20 patients, and Level 3 for anything over 20.
So the bigger the incident, the bigger the response.
Exactly. Each level triggers a specific chain of actions.
Okay, so walk me through what that looks like in practice.
So let's say we have a level 1 MCI, 4 to 9 patients.
Okay,
They would dispatch at least 3 ambulances.
right.
They'd notify key personnel like the paramedic superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
They alert nearby hospitals and even consider bringing in extra staff.
So even for a smaller incident, it's a pretty significant response.
It is. Now, with a level 2 incident,
10 to 20 patients.
yeah, 10 to 20 patients, they would ramp things up even further.
Yeah.
They'd dispatch the emergency support unit.
Oh, wow.
They'd start planning for mutual aid.
Okay.
Maybe even call in air ambulance support.
It's a whole other level.
It is. And then, if they hit that level 3 threshold over 20 patients,
Okay.
it's all hands on deck. They dispatch at least 6 ambulances. The emergency support unit is deployed, maybe even from other districts.
Wow.
They cancel all non-urgent transfers
Really?
and start bringing in all the extra resources they can get their hands on.
That's a major mobilization. It's amazing how they can scale their response to meet the needs of the situation.
It really is. Having these clear procedures in place helps to eliminate confusion and ensures they can respond quickly and efficiently.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about deployment coverage. It seems like this is all about making sure there are always enough ambulances available.
Right. It's all about resource management and ensuring they have enough ambulances staffed and ready to go.
And they have this minimum availability statement, which outlines the minimum number of ambulances required in each region.
And when they say available ambulance, they mean an ambulance that's staffed and ready to be dispatched immediately.
So not just any ambulance sitting in a garage somewhere.
Exactly. It has to be ready to roll.
So what happens if the number of available ambulances falls below that minimum?
Well, they have a clear process for handling that. They might delay non-urgent calls,
Yeah.
prioritize emergency calls, and inform what they call sending facilities about potential delays.
Sending facilities?
Yeah, these are places like hospitals that might be requesting ambulances for non-emergency transfers.
Okay, got it.
So it's about managing expectations and making sure everyone is aware of the situation.
So it's like a constantly balancing act to ensure adequate coverage for everyone.
It really is. And the paramedic superintendent plays a key role in making sure resources are allocated effectively.
They have a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, they make those tough decisions when resources are limited.
Now, there's a section that focuses on Sudbury North staffing patterns.
Right. This is for Gugama, Foley, and Cheplow.
And it talks about how they keep the Sutter ACC updated about any changes in staffing levels.
Yeah, so they can adjust the non-urgent transfer schedule accordingly.
Okay, so it's all about communication and coordination.
Exactly. It ensures that emergency coverage isn't compromised by an overload of non-urgent transfers.
It's like a well-choreographed dance, keeping everything running smoothly.
Precisely. It's a dynamic system that requires constant communication and adaptation.
Now let's talk about the unique challenges of the Sudbury North area.
You're talking about this emergency coverage statement section, right?
Right. It seems like they have to think outside the box to provide coverage in areas with vast distances and limited resources.
They do. And they provide a great example with Foley and Chapleau. If the Chapleau paramedics are unavailable for more than 2 hours,
Yeah.
the paramedics from Foley will be put on standby at the Chapleau station.
So they have a backup for their backup.
Exactly. It's all about making sure no community is left without coverage, no matter what.
They've really thought of everything.
It's impressive. They've taken these unique challenges and developed a system that can adapt and overcome them.
It's amazing how they've woven ground and air transportation together to create this comprehensive response system.
And it goes beyond just logistics. They're really committed to serving the needs of the community.
I'm really impressed with this plan. They've meticulously thought through every possible scenario.
It's clear they've put a lot of work into this.
They haven't left anything to chance.
It's inspiring to see their dedication.
I'm still processing all of this. It's incredible how much planning has gone into this deployment plan.
Right. They've anticipated so many challenges. It's not just about reacting to emergencies. It's about being prepared.
Exactly. And it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. They've tailored the plan to the specific needs and geography of the region.
Like you said, vast distances, remote communities, the unique challenges of Manitoulin Island. They've thought about it all.
And they've created a system that can adapt on the fly. Staffing levels, non-urgent transfers, air ambulance availability, it's all connected.
They haven't left anything to chance.
Yeah.
And it's not just about technology and logistics either.
Right. There's a real human element to this plan.
Exactly. You can see it in the emphasis on communication, the partnerships they've built, their commitment to community engagement.
It's not just about dispatching ambulances. It's about building relationships, promoting awareness, fostering a culture of preparedness.
I think there's a lesson there for all of us, no matter what field we're in.
Absolutely. Be proactive, be adaptable, and approach challenges with a holistic mindset. That's what the paramedics of Manitoulin Sudbury are doing.
And in doing so, they're showing us that we can find solutions to complex problems.
So there you have it. A glimpse into the incredible world of paramedic deployment in Manitoulin Sudbury.
It's a truly inspiring example of what can be accomplished with careful planning, collaboration, and a dedication to serving the community.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
As technology continues to evolve, how do you think emergency response will change in the future?
That's a great question.
Will drones deliver medical supplies? Will AI help dispatchers make even faster decisions? The possibilities are endless.
It's an exciting time to be following this field.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of paramedics. Until next time, stay curious. All right, so today we're diving into something most people probably don't think about too much unless they really need it.
Yeah,
Emergency medical services.
right.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at the Manitoulin Sudbury region and their paramedic services deployment plan,
Okay.
which is basically how they make sure that ambulances are where they need to be when someone calls 911.
Exactly. And it's really important for a region like this because it's not just about having enough ambulances, it's about having them in the right places
Right.
at the right times and ready to respond to a really diverse landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this plan is crucial for making sure everyone in those communities has access to timely care.
So this idea of minimum available ambulances kind of jumped out at me when I was looking through this plan.
Okay.
What exactly does that mean?
So minimum available ambulances refers to the fewest number of ambulances that need to be ready to go at any given time in a specific area.
Okay.
It's like a safety net, ensuring there's always a certain level of coverage.
Hmm.
And the plan actually has different tiers of response based on how many ambulances are free
Okay.
in both the North area and the Sudbury East area.
So it's not just like a fixed number for the whole region.
Right. It's way more dynamic than that.
Okay.
So imagine a scenario where the North area is down to only 2 ambulances available.
Mm-hmm.
That triggers a whole chain reaction.
Okay.
They might start clearing units from hospitals,
Okay.
meaning ambulances that just dropped off a patient would head back out even if they haven't been fully restocked yet.
Wow. So they're really having to like shuffle things around to make sure that those minimums are met.
Exactly. And they might also delay non-urgent transfers,
Okay.
meaning a patient who needs to be moved between facilities but isn't in immediate danger
Right.
might have to wait a bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about prioritizing resources to make sure they're available for the most critical situations.
Yeah, that makes sense, but I imagine it gets pretty complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the geography.
Right.
So let's take Sudbury East, for example.
Mm.
Okay, they've got 3 stations, Knollville, Hagar, and Killarney,
Mm-hmm.
each responsible for a huge chunk of territory.
Yeah.
Think about covering everything from Highway 69 and Doki's First Nation all the way to Killarney proper.
Right.
It's a lot of ground to manage.
Yeah, those are pretty diverse areas too. I imagine they have some very different needs.
Exactly, and the plan takes that into account.
Okay.
For example, the municipality of French River has a really high call volume.
Mm.
So the plan outlines a special protocol they use.
Okay.
When the Knollville ambulance, which normally covers that area, is unavailable,
Right.
the French River Fire Department steps in to provide that initial response.
So it's kind of like a built-in backup system?
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
And speaking of backups,
Yeah.
this plan even includes details about helipads for Orange Air Ambulance.
Oh, wow.
It specifies which ones can handle nighttime landings
Okay.
and whether they're equipped for night vision goggles.
So it's almost like having an air rescue option built into this whole system. That's pretty cool.
It is.
I'm starting to see just how much detail goes into making sure that help can reach people quickly no matter where they are.
Yeah.
But what about like areas with lower call volumes?
Okay.
Like you mentioned Killarney.
Right.
Are they just kind of sitting around waiting for something to happen?
Not at all.
Okay.
The Killarney ambulance can actually be strategically deployed to other areas when needed,
Oh, okay.
like covering parts of Sudbury East if their resources are stretched thin.
Mm.
It's all part of this incredibly dynamic system
Yeah.
where ambulances are constantly being shifted around to maintain that safety net of coverage.
It really does sound like a carefully choreographed dance.
It does.
Speaking of different areas, let's move over to Manitoulin and La Cloche.
All right.
It's got to be even more challenging, right? I mean, we're talking islands, remote communities, the whole works.
You're absolutely right. And that's where this concept of coverage zones comes into play.
Okay.
The plan divides Manitoulin and La Cloche into 3 zones: Manitoulin West, Manitoulin East, and La Cloche. Okay. Each with its own set of challenges and strategies.
So how do they make sure that those zones are covered effectively? It seems like it would be easy for things to get spread pretty thin.
Well, they've strategically paired stations within each zone.
Okay.
So take Manitoulin West, for example.
Okay.
Let's say the ambulance in Machijing is busy on a call
You're right.
to make sure coverage isn't compromised. The ambulance from Little Current, which is paired with Machijing,
Mm-hmm.
can be deployed to cover that area until the Machijing ambulance is free.
So it's like a buddy system for ambulances.
It is, and this system extends to other areas as well.
Okay.
The plan highlights how certain ambulances, like the ones in Mindamoya and Tukuma,
Mm-hmm.
can be used to cover multiple zones depending on where the need is greatest at any given time.
So they're really having to be flexible and adaptable to make sure everything runs smoothly.
Yeah,
I can only imagine the kind of coordination and communication that takes.
you're spot on, and that brings us to the heart of this whole operation, the Central Ambulance Communication Center, or CCC.
Okay.
This is where the real magic happens.
I definitely want to hear more about that CCCC and the people who are like making those split-second decisions.
Yeah,
That's got to be a pretty intense job.
it definitely is. The ambulance communications officers, or ACOs, are the ones who are constantly monitoring the situation,
Right.
dispatching ambulances and making sure those minimum available ambulances numbers are met.
Mm-hmm.
It's like air traffic control, but for life-saving vehicles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've laid the groundwork, let's dig a little deeper into how they manage those resources, especially when things get really busy.
Okay.
And there are only so many ambulances to go around.
That's a crucial point, and it leads us to another interesting aspect of this plan,
Okay.
how they prioritize calls and manage those inevitable delays.
Right, because in a perfect world, everyone would get an ambulance immediately, but that's just not realistic.
You're right, and this plan has some really fascinating insights into how they balance the need for quick response times with the reality of limited resources.
Yep.
So let's explore that further. So sometimes, despite their best efforts, delays are unavoidable, especially for those lower priority calls.
That makes sense. I mean, if someone's having a heart attack, they're obviously going to get priority over like a sprained ankle, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The plan actually categorizes calls into different priority levels.
Okay.
Priority 1 calls are the most urgent,
Right.
like heart attacks, strokes, major trauma,
Mm-hmm.
situations where every second counts.
So those are the ones that get an ambulance dispatched immediately no matter what.
Pretty much as close to immediately as possible.
Okay.
Then you have priority 2 calls,
Yeah.
which might be things like serious but not life-threatening injuries or illnesses.
Okay.
And then there are priority 3 calls, which are generally less urgent and may not require immediate transport to the hospital.
Okay, so it's kind of like a triage system, but for like the whole region.
Precisely.
Just making sure that the most critical cases get attention first.
Exactly. And that's where those delays we talked about come into play. Delaying a non-urgent transfer, for example, might free up an ambulance to respond to a more critical situation somewhere else.
So these ACOs at the CACC, they're not just looking at a map and sending the nearest ambulance.
Right.
They're making some pretty complex judgment calls, huh?
Absolutely. They have to consider the priority level of each call, the availability of ambulances in different zones, the specific capabilities of each ambulance.
Right.
It's a lot to juggle, especially in a fast-paced, high-pressure environment.
It's got to be a really demanding job.
Yeah.
I mean, not just like logistically, but emotionally too. You know, these are people's lives we're talking about.
That's an important point that often gets overlooked. These ACOs are dealing with life or death situations on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The weight of those decisions can be immense.
And it's all happening behind the scenes. You know, most people don't even realize the level of complexity involved.
Exactly. We pick up the phone, dial 911, and expect help to arrive. But there's this whole intricate system working tirelessly to make that happen.
So going back to the plan, what kind of guidance does it give the ACOs for handling those really tough calls?
Okay.
Like, how do they decide when it's okay to delay a response or when they absolutely need to call in backup?
Well, the plan provides a framework for those decisions.
Okay.
It outlines different scenarios and the appropriate actions to take.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if the number of available ambulances in the north area drops below 2,
Okay.
they're instructed to clear all units from destination sites,
Right.
delay non-urgent transfers, and notify the paramedic superintendent.
So it's almost like a flow chart, guiding them through a series of escalating responses as the situation gets more critical.
It is, and it's a testament to their commitment to maintaining that safety net of coverage,
Yeah.
even when resources are stretched thin.
I'm curious what happens in that worst case scenario where there are literally 0 ambulances available in an area.
Right.
Does the plan address that?
It does, and it highlights the importance of collaboration. In those extreme cases, the plan dictates that they're to immediately notify neighboring paramedic services for potential assistance.
So it's not just about managing resources within the Manitoulin-Sudbury region.
Right.
They can actually call on help from surrounding areas if needed.
Absolutely. They might borrow an ambulance from a neighboring service temporarily, or even request what's called standby coverage,
Okay.
where an ambulance from another area is stationed strategically to fill a gap.
Wow, so it really is like an interconnected system.
It is, and it's constantly evolving as new technologies and strategies emerge.
Right.
This plan we're discussing is just a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Imagine what these systems might look like 10 years from now,
Oh, yeah.
with advances in telemedicine, predictive modeling, drone technology.
Wow.
It's an exciting time to be thinking about the future of emergency medical services.
You're right, and it's not just about technology either. It's about making sure that these systems are adaptable and responsive to the unique needs of different communities.
Speaking of adaptability, let's loop back to the staffing aspect.
Okay.
This plan doesn't just outline response protocols.
Right.
It gets into the nitty-gritty of how these stations are staffed.
You mean like how many paramedics are on duty at each station and things like that?
Exactly. It lays out the expected staffing levels for each station in both Sudbury East and the Manitoulin and La Cloche areas.
Okay.
And here's where that proactive communication piece comes in again.
Okay.
The plan specifically states that the CACC should be notified of any known or anticipated changes in staffing.
So if a station knows that they're going to be short-staffed for a shift,
Right.
the CICC can factor that into their decision-making.
Exactly. They might adjust the non-urgent transfer schedule, for instance,
Right.
to make sure there are enough ambulances available to cover the gaps.
So it's all about anticipating those potential challenges and adjusting accordingly.
Precisely.
It's amazing how much planning goes into something that most of us take for granted.
Yeah.
You dial 911 and you just assume an ambulance will show up. But there's this whole intricate web of logistics, communication, and human decision-making behind it all.
It's truly remarkable.
Hmm.
And what's even more impressive is that it's constantly being refined and improved upon.
So with that in mind, where do you see the future of emergency medical services heading?
Okay.
What kind of innovations or changes do you think we might see in the coming years?
Well, one area that's really intriguing is the potential of real-time data analysis and predictive modeling to optimize ambulance deployment.
You mean like using data to anticipate where and when ambulances might be needed most?
Exactly.
That sounds pretty futuristic.
It's closer than you might think. Imagine a system that can analyze historical data traffic patterns, weather forecasts, and even large-scale events to predict surges in demand.
So instead of just reacting to emergencies, they could be proactive and position ambulances in areas where they're most likely to be needed.
Precisely. It's like those ride-sharing apps, but for life-saving services.
Right.
And then there's the potential of using drones to deliver medical supplies or even transport patients in certain situations.
That does sound kind of like a sci-fi movie,
Yeah.
but I can see how it would be incredibly valuable, especially in remote areas or during natural disasters.
Absolutely. But even with all these technological advancements, it's important to remember that the human element will always be at the heart of emergency medical services.
You mean the paramedics, the
Yeah.
ACOs,
Right.
all the people who are making those life or death decisions every day?
Precisely, no amount of technology can replace the compassion, intuition, and critical thinking skills that these individuals bring to the table.
Well said. So while technology might change how ambulances are deployed or how patients are transported,
Right.
it's ultimately those human connections and the dedication of the people on the front lines that make these systems work.
Couldn't agree more. And this plan is a powerful reminder of the importance of supporting these essential services
Yeah.
and advocating for continued investment in the people and technologies that keep them running.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
We've gone from the nuts and bolts of minimum available ambulances to the complex decision-making happening at the CACC to the potential for technology to reshape the future of emergency medical services.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
What are your final thoughts for our listener before we wrap up this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that while these systems might seem invisible to most of us, they are absolutely vital to our safety and well-being.
Yeah.
Understanding how they work, the challenges they face, and the dedication of the people involved is the first step towards ensuring that everyone has access to timely and effective emergency care, no matter where they live.
Yeah, it really has been a fascinating look into this whole system.
It makes you realize just how much goes into it.
Yeah, for sure. I think our listeners are probably starting to see just how much happens behind the scenes, when you just dial 911.
Yeah, it's not just ambulances rushing to the scene.
Right.
It's this carefully coordinated system designed to make sure that those ambulances are in the right place at the right time, ready to respond to whatever comes their way.
And it really all comes down to people. The paramedics, the ACOs, the folks behind the scenes, making sure that the whole system runs smoothly.
You're absolutely right. Technology plays a role, but it's the human element that really makes the difference.
Yeah.
Those split-second decisions, the ability to adapt to unexpected situations, the compassion and dedication that goes into caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. That's what makes this system so remarkable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with?
I'd say it's the understanding that emergency medical services are a precious resource.
And one that we often take for granted.
Exactly. It's easy to forget about all the planning, the coordination, the dedication that goes into ensuring we have access to timely and effective care when we need it most.
Yeah.
And this deep dive has shown us just how crucial those efforts are.
It's really made me think about how interconnected we all are and how we rely on these systems and the people who run them to be there for us when things go wrong.
And that reliance goes both ways.
Yeah.
These systems need our support, our understanding, and our advocacy to ensure they can continue to serve our communities effectively.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real journey of discovery.
It really has.
And hopefully for our listener, it's sparked a new level of awareness and appreciation for the incredible work being done by emergency medical services every day.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember to thank a paramedic or an ACO if you get the chance.
They deserve it.
They truly are the unsung heroes of our communities.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be going on a deep dive into something that I think you'll find pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I know that you're really interested in how systems work, especially when it comes to emergencies. So I think this is going to be right up your alley.
I think so.
It's really cool how they have this whole system set up.
Yeah.
So I think you'll get a real kick out of it. Basically, we're going to be looking at the procedures they use for everything from dispatching the ambulances to how they manage the paramedic shifts.
Right.
And even the lengths they go to make sure that the paramedics are safe out in the field.
I mean, that's super important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You can't have them going out there, without proper procedures in place.
Yeah, and that's really what struck me about this plan is how they've managed to strike this balance between needing to get to the scene quickly, but also making sure that they're doing it in a way that doesn't put the paramedics at risk.
Yeah, it's got to be safe and efficient.
Right. It's like a carefully choreographed dance.
I like that analogy.
So before we get too far into the weeds, let's just sort of set the stage here. So this deployment plan covers the Manitoulin-Sudbury District Services Board.
The DSB.
Yeah, the DSB for short. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Ontario, the Ambulance Act actually mandates that the DSBs, they're actually responsible for providing land ambulance services. Now, most people might know these as upper-tier municipalities.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that term.
But in most of northern Ontario, there aren't actually any UTMs.
Okay.
So the terms upper-tier municipalities and district services boards, they're pretty much interchangeable.
Right.
So that's just the framework under which this whole thing operates.
Okay, yeah, that's important to know.
Yeah, it kind of lays the groundwork. So now let's imagine for a second that someone's at home and they need to call 911.
Okay.
What happens next?
Well, that call goes directly to one of 3 central ambulance communication centers.
Or CVCs.
Yeah, exactly. CACCs for short. They're like the control centers. The whole system. We're
Yep.
talking Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, and Timmins. So these CACCs, they're responsible for a lot. They dispatch the closest available ambulance. They track the locations of all the units, and they make sure that there's adequate coverage across the region.
That sounds like a pretty demanding job.
It is, yeah, especially when you consider the huge area that they have to cover.
Right. And, to do that effectively, they've got to know this deployment plan inside and out.
Oh, absolutely.
Like everything from staffing patterns to how to handle different types of calls.
Right.
It's all in their hands.
Big responsibility.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the paramedics themselves,
Okay.
because I know you're always fascinated by like the behind the scenes stuff.
Always, yeah.
So their day actually starts with a very strict 20-minute window
Okay.
for vehicle and equipment checks.
Makes sense.
And any delays have to be reported immediately to
Yeah.
both the CKCC and the paramedic superintendent.
Wow, so there's no messing around.
No, like that tight time frame really emphasizes that,
Yeah.
they've got to be ready to go at a moment's notice.
Yeah, any delay could have a ripple effect on the whole system.
Right. And what if an emergency call comes in during those 20 minutes while they're doing their checks?
Well, then patient care obviously comes first.
Okay.
So they would stop what they're doing and respond immediately.
Okay.
And then if they realize that they're missing something really important,
Like a piece of equipment.
yeah, they can request backup and the CCC will send another unit to cover that area.
Wow. Talking about high pressure.
Yeah, you got to think on your feet.
So speaking of high pressure, shift changes. I imagine those are pretty delicate as well, especially if those urgent calls are coming in.
Oh, absolutely. Those priority 3 and 4 calls.
Yeah, which are the emergencies that need a quick response.
Right, exactly. And priority 4 being the most urgent.
Yeah, they can't always wait for a shift change to finish.
Nope. So the plan actually has specific holding times
Okay.
that are meant to minimize those disruptions during shift changes.
Okay, so what about the non-urgent calls?
Ah, well, they have a system for that too.
Okay.
So first they try to assign those calls to paramedics who are already on site.
So like people who are finishing up a previous call.
Yeah, exactly. Or who are already at their
Wow.
base.
Okay.
They'll actually hold a non-urgent call for up to an hour
Wow.
to see if an on-site crew becomes available.
Okay.
It's only if no one's free within that hour that they'll assign it to someone who's on call.
So they try to keep those on-call paramedics fresh and ready for the really serious stuff.
Exactly. And even at the end of their shift,
Hmm.
they still need to be response ready.
Okay.
So that means finishing up any patient transfers.
Getting the equipment ready for the next shift.
Yeah, all of that. And the plan actually says specifically that they shouldn't be given any non-urgent tasks.
That might push them into overtime.
Right. It's all about making sure they're ready for the next emergency.
Okay, so now here's where things get really interesting. What if a crew is like in the middle of transporting a patient a long distance
Yeah.
and their shift ends?
Well, that's when the crew change mid-transport protocol comes in.
Really?
Yeah. And the plan actually allows for this, but only under very specific conditions.
Like what?
Well, the route has to take them within 2 kilometers of their station,
Okay.
and they need to get the patient's consent.
Of course.
It has to be like a lower acuity case.
Okay.
And the paramedics who are taking over,
Yeah.
they have to be ready to start their shift.
Wow. So they really thought of everything.
It's all about balancing patient care with the logistics of those shift changes.
Yeah. And that actually brings us to another really important part of this plan, which is the focus on paramedic safety.
Absolutely can't forget about that.
No, and it goes way beyond just giving them the right equipment.
Yeah.
They have procedures for everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like how to approach a potentially dangerous scene, how to communicate with the CACC if things go wrong.
It's a really comprehensive approach to safety.
Yeah. For instance, like, let's say a paramedic arrives at a scene and they just get this gut feeling that it's
Yeah.
not safe.
Right.
They're actually trained to trust that instinct.
You what they say, trust your gut.
Right.
So
Now-
they actually have the authority to make that judgment call right then and there.
Wow. So they can just decide, nope, this isn't safe. I'm out of here.
Exactly. They disengage, find a safe place, and call the CACC.
And the CACC can't, like, order them to stay at a scene.
Not unless the police have already said that there's a threat.
Wow. So they're really putting the power in the hands of the paramedics.
It's about trusting their judgment.
Okay. So how do they stay in communication with the CACC while they're out on a call?
Well, as soon as they make contact with the patient
Uh-huh.
and confirm that the scene is secure,
Yeah.
they have to radio the CAC.
Okay.
And they have to give them very specific information like their CTS,
Which-
the Canadian Triage and Acuity Scale. It's basically a way to assess how serious the patient's condition is.
Okay.
And they also have to tell them about the security of the scene.
So it's a constant stream of information.
Exactly. Everyone's always in the loop.
Okay. But what if a paramedic, doesn't check in within a certain amount of time?
Well, if they don't check in within 5 minutes, the CACC starts trying to get in touch with them.
Well,
They try their portable radio first,
okay.
and then they try calling their callback number.
And if that doesn't work?
And then they call the police and the paramedic superintendent.
Wow, so they don't mess around with communication breakdown.
Nope, it's too risky in that environment.
Right. Okay. So what about those situations where a paramedic needs backup, immediately?
They have special 10 codes for that.
Oh, okay.
So 10-200 is for routine assistance.
Okay.
So the paramedic would explain to the CSIC why they need the police.
Like if they need help controlling a crowd or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I'm guessing the other code is for when things are really serious.
Exactly 10-2000. Or they can hit the emergency button on their radio.
Oh, wow.
That means they need help. Now, no explanation needed.
So the CACC just dispatches the police immediately.
Yep. It's all about getting them help as quickly as possible.
Okay, so it seems like the paramedic superintendent, they play a pretty big role in all this.
Oh, yeah, they're involved in a lot of different situations.
Like when?
Well, if the coverage levels drop below a certain standard,
Okay.
or if there's any incident involving a Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB employee,
Really?
even something like a non-urgent transfer getting delayed by more than an hour, they need to be notified.
So they're really keeping an eye on everything.
It's all about oversight and making sure things run smoothly.
Now, amidst all this talk about emergencies and protocols, I have to ask,
What's that?
what about the paramedics themselves? Do they get to eat?
Of course they do. They
Right.
get a 30-minute meal break.
Okay.
And the schedule is all laid out in Appendix C of the plan.
Wow, they really do think of everything.
Yeah, and the CACC tries not to assign any non-emergency calls during those meal periods.
Okay.
And the paramedics have to let the CACC know if they leave their station to get food.
Hold on, leaving their station. What if a call comes in while they're out grabbing a bite?
Well, for those priority 3 calls,
Time-sensitive ones.
yeah, the CACC will actually hold them for up to 15 minutes,
Okay.
just to give the paramedics a chance to finish eating.
Well, that's good.
It's a balance,
Yeah.
making sure that the calls are answered, but also that the paramedics are taken care of.
Right. And what if a paramedic has a really long-distance transfer?
Right.
That's going to take their whole meal period.
Well, if that's the case, the CSCC will schedule an early meal break for them
Really?
before they even hit the road.
Right.
And they'll delay the call by 30 minutes.
Wow. So they really do prioritize their well-being.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So we've talked about regular shifts and meal breaks.
Yeah.
But what about those times when a paramedic needs to be strategically positioned somewhere, even if there isn't an active call?
You're talking about standby locations.
Yeah.
Well, the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB, they don't usually rely on standby assignments for coverage.
Okay.
But when they do need to use them, the deployment plan has some very specific guidelines.
What kind of guidelines are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, the standby assignment shouldn't last longer than 2 hours,
Okay.
unless it's at one of their established stations. And here's a really interesting detail. If the standby location doesn't have a washroom,
Oh, okay.
the paramedics and the CACC will work together to find an alternative spot for them to take a 15-minute break.
Wow. So they've really thought of everything.
It's all about taking care of the paramedics, even in those less than ideal situations.
So does the plan say anything about specific alternate break locations for certain areas?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Like if a crew is stationed at Moore's Corner, their alternate break location would be either Little Current or the Mindemoya base,
Okay.
especially at night.
Oh, and why is that?
I'm guessing it's a combination of things.
Like,
Well, proximity to amenities, security considerations,
Okay.
maybe even response time optimization.
so they want to make sure the paramedics are never too far from a place where they can rest and be ready to go.
Exactly.
It's really amazing how they've put all this together.
It is. It's quite a system.
Yeah. And, we've only scratched the surface here,
I know, right?
but I'm already getting a good sense of how this DSB operates.
It's really quite impressive.
So before we move on to the next part, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Given all the detail and the regulations that we've seen so far,
Yeah.
how do you think all of this impacts the efficiency and effectiveness of the paramedics' response in the Manitoulin-Sudbury region?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. Something to think about.
I'm going to have to ponder that one.
Yeah. And for all of you listening out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, definitely.
So join us next time as we continue our deep dive into the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're going to keep digging into this Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB Paramedic Services Deployment Plan.
All right, let's do it. So we've covered some of the day-to-day stuff,
Yeah, the procedures and all.
but now I want to get into the plan itself.
Okay, sure.
Like, what kind of information does it actually contain? Is it just a bunch of rules and regulations?
Well, it is that, but it's also so much more. Think of it as the master blueprint
Okay.
for how they run their EMS system.
So it tells them where to station ambulances?
Yep,
How many paramedics they need on duty at any given time?
absolutely.
Wow.
It even takes into account things like population density, geographic challenges, historical call volume, all that stuff.
So they're really thinking about where to allocate their resources.
They're strategic about it.
And it tells them what kind of ambulances they need.
Yep, they've got different types,
Like the basic life support ones,
Right.
and then the ones that are equipped for more serious stuff.
Exactly, the advanced care ambulances.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Nope, they tailored their resources to the needs of the community.
Okay, so we talked about those priority levels before.
Hmm.
Priority 4 being the most urgent.
Right, the ones that can't wait.
So I'm guessing the plan also tells them how to handle those different priority levels,
It lays out specific procedures for each one,
like
like how long they can hold a call, who they need to notify,
okay.
what factors to consider when assigning an ambulance.
So it's not just about sending the closest unit.
Nope, it's got to be the right unit for the situation.
What about large-scale incidents?
You mean MCIs?
Yeah, multi-patient incidents.
They've got protocols for those too.
So like coordinating multiple ambulances.
Yeah, and potentially even hospitals outside the area.
Wow.
It get pretty complicated.
And what about interfacility transfers?
They've got that covered too.
So like if a patient needs to be moved from one hospital to another,
Exactly. They have procedures for both urgent and non-urgent transfers, making sure that they don't disrupt the emergency coverage in the region.
it's amazing how they've thought of everything.
They really have. It's impressive.
Now, we've talked a lot about the CICC's role, but does the plan also give guidance to the paramedics themselves?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like how to handle specific situations?
Like those safety protocols we talked about?
Yeah, like how to assess a scene for safety,
Exactly.
how to communicate if things get dicey.
All that's in there.
So it's like their field manual,
And their safety guide.
all rolled into one.
Yeah, it even covers the day-to-day stuff.
Like shift changes and meal breaks.
And even those mid-transport crew swaps.
So it really is comprehensive.
It's everything they need to know.
Now, you mentioned earlier that it's a living document. So I'm guessing that means it's not set in stone.
That's right.
So how do they keep it updated?
They have a process for reviewing and updating it regularly,
Okay.
making sure it reflects the changes in the community.
Like population growth.
Exactly, or call volume patterns or even new medical technologies.
So they're constantly analyzing data, looking for ways to improve.
Always evolving.
So they might find that they need to increase coverage in a certain area,
Right, or adjust their protocols based on new research.
or even feedback from the paramedics.
Absolutely, they value input from the front lines.
It's a really impressive system.
It is, yeah. They've managed to create something that's both structured and flexible.
Out of all the things we've talked about so far, what stood out to you the most about this plan?
Honestly, I think it's the focus on paramedic safety.
Yeah.
It really is impressive how much they prioritize the well-being of their team.
It's like they've thought of everything.
From scene assessment to communication to backup, they've got it all covered.
It's refreshing to see an organization that really values its people.
Yeah, they understand that the paramedics are the backbone of the system.
Speaking of the paramedics, let's talk about the vehicles they use.
Okay.
What can you tell me about their ambulance fleet?
Well, it's a pretty diverse fleet. They've got a mix of different types of ambulances.
Okay.
They've got the basic life support units for the less critical calls, and then they've got the advanced care ambulances.
Which are like mobile ICUs?
Exactly, ready to handle those really serious emergencies.
So they've got the right tools for the job.
They're prepared for anything.
What kind of equipment do they have inside those ambulances?
Oh, it varies depending on the type of ambulance.
Sure.
But in general, they've got everything from basic first aid supplies to advanced life support equipment,
Like what?
like defibrillators, cardiac monitors, even portable ventilators.
So they're like mini hospitals on wheels.
Pretty much.
And I'm guessing they also have specialized equipment for Trauma cases?
Oh, yeah, of course, things like spinal immobilization devices, traction splints, all that stuff.
It's all very impressive.
It is, yeah, they're well equipped.
So how do they maintain such a diverse fleet?
They have their own mechanics for routine maintenance and repairs. And for the more complex stuff, like ambulance remounts, they contract with specialized vendors.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. Got to keep those ambulances rolling.
But what happens if an ambulance breaks down in the middle of a call?
That's where their backup system comes in.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the CAC tracking all the ambulances?
Yeah. With the GPS?
Exactly. So if an ambulance breaks down, they can immediately dispatch another unit to take over.
So there's always a safety net.
That's the idea.
How do they make sure their paramedics stay connected and informed?
Well, technology plays a big role there.
Okay.
The ambulances have advanced communication systems.
So they can stay in touch with the CACC.
Yep, and they can even transmit patient data back to the hospital.
Wow. So it's not just about getting to the scene. It's about staying connected.
Absolutely, communication is key.
And the GPS tracking, that's going to be really helpful.
Oh yeah, it helps them dispatch the closest unit,
Okay.
and it also gives them data to analyze response times.
So they can see if they need to improve coverage in certain areas.
Exactly. It's all about using technology to enhance their operations.
Now, you mentioned their base hospital program earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. Think of the base hospitals as the medical backbone of the EMS system.
Okay.
They provide medical oversight training, quality assurance, all that stuff.
So they're kind of like the control center for the medical side of things.
In a way, yeah.
They're-
They set the medical protocols the paramedics follow.
Hmm.
They provide ongoing training,
Yep.
and they make sure that the quality of care is up to par.
So they're ensuring that every response is guided by the best medical practices.
Exactly. And for the Manitoulin Sudbury DSB, their base hospital is the Health Sciences North Center for pre-hospital care.
That sounds like a reputable institution.
It is. Yeah, they're a leader in the field.
So what does that mean for the paramedics?
It means they have access to top-notch expertise and resources.
Okay.
They get specialized training. They benefit from cutting-edge protocol.
And they can consult with specialists if they need to.
Exactly. It's a huge advantage, especially in those critical situations.
Now, one thing I've heard about the Manitoulin Sudbury DSB is that they try to staff all their bases with primary care paramedics.
PCPs, yeah.
What's the difference between a PCP and other types of paramedics?
Well, PCPs have a higher level of training.
Okay.
They can perform a wider range of procedures, administer more medications.
So they're bringing a higher level of care to the patients.
Exactly, and that's especially important in remote areas where access to hospitals might be limited.
So they're making sure that everyone has access to quality care, regardless of where they live.
That's the goal.
And to maintain those high standards, I'm guessing they also have a lot of ongoing training.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What does that involve?
Well, on top of their initial paramedic education, which is pretty intense,
Yeah.
they have regular in-service training to keep their skills sharp,
Okay.
and they have to maintain their certification with the base hospital.
So they're constantly learning and evolving.
It's a continuous process.
Okay, now let's talk about something that's a challenge for a lot of VMS systems. Ambulance offload delays.
Oh, yeah, those can be a real headache.
I've heard about them, but I'm not really sure what they are or why they're such a big deal.
Okay, so basically an offload delay happens when an ambulance arrives at the hospital with a patient,
Yeah.
but they can't transfer the patient to the hospital staff right away.
So the ambulance is just stuck there waiting.
Yep. And that's a problem for a couple of reasons.
Like what?
Well, first of all, it ties up that ambulance and its crew,
Okay.
so they can't respond to other emergencies.
Right, they're out of commission,
Exactly. And that can lead to longer response times.
which could be dangerous.
Absolutely, it puts lives at risk.
And it's got to be stressful for the paramedics, too.
Oh, yeah, they can be stuck there for hours sometimes.
So it's a lose-lose situation.
Pretty much.
So how does the Manitoulin Sudbury DSB handle this problem?
Well, they have specific offload delay mitigation protocols built right into their plan.
Okay, so they have a plan.
They're not just ignoring the problem.
So what kind of stuff is in those protocols?
Well, the CSCC monitors the offload delays,
Okay.
and they report them to the paramedic superintendent.
So the superintendent can keep an eye on things.
Yep, and potentially intervene if it gets out of hand.
And the paramedics themselves have things they can do.
Yeah, like communicating with the hospital staff,
Hmm.
providing detailed patient information, advocating for their patient.
So they're not just sitting around waiting.
Nope, they're trying to get things moving.
And in some cases, they can actually transfer the patient to a different hospital.
If the original one is experiencing really bad delays,
Wow.
it's all about getting the patient the right care as quickly as possible.
Right, so they're really thinking outside the box.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that offload delays are a complex issue.
Yeah, it's not a simple fix.
Nope. It's a system-wide problem.
But the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB is taking a proactive approach.
They're doing what they can to minimize the impact.
Okay, so we've talked about dispatch, safety equipment, maintenance, even offload delays.
It's quite a system.
Yeah, it seems like they've thought of everything.
They've really gone to great lengths to create a top-notch system.
Now, we've been focusing on this one specific DSB,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm curious about how their system fits into the bigger picture of EMS in Ontario.
Okay, good question.
Like, is there a central authority that oversees everything?
Well, yeah, the Ministry of Health plays a big role.
Okay.
They set the standards for ambulance services, allocate funding.
So they're making sure that everyone gets consistent care.
Exactly, regardless of where they live.
And each individual service, like the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB, they develop their own plan
Right.
to fit the needs of their community.
Within those guidelines, yeah.
So it's a balance between following the rules and being flexible.
Exactly.
Now, one thing I've always found interesting about Ontario's EMS system is their focus on continuous quality improvement.
Oh, yeah. They're always looking for ways to get better.
So they're constantly collecting data, analyzing performance, looking for areas to improve.
Exactly. It's a never-ending process.
So they might tweak their dispatch protocols,
Right.
or refine their medical treatment guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
or even invest in new technologies or training programs.
It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
Now, I know there's a big shortage of paramedics across Canada these days.
Yeah, it's a growing problem.
How is that affecting the system?
Well, it's leading to longer wait times,
Okay.
increased burnout among paramedics, difficulty recruiting new staff.
So it's a pretty significant challenge.
It is, but they're working on it.
Okay.
They're trying to attract more people to the profession, improve working conditions.
So there's a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. It's a complex issue.
So given everything we've learned about the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB and the broader EMS system,
Mm-hmm.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that effective EMS systems require careful planning,
Okay.
clear communication, and a commitment to improvement.
Right? It's not just about showing up with an ambulance.
No, it's a whole system.
And the paramedics themselves, they're the heart of it all.
Absolutely. They're the ones who are making a difference in people's lives.
And they deserve our support.
More than ever. Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about the specific challenges that the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB faces.
Okay.
I mean, their region is pretty unique.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm guessing that creates some obstacles that other services might not have to deal with.
Absolutely. They've got geography, weather, demographics.
It's a lot to contend with.
It is, but they're handling it.
So let's break it down.
Oh, okay.
First off, geography.
Right. Well, they cover a huge area,
Yeah.
both mainland and islands,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to provide coverage to a mix of urban, suburban, and rural communities,
So it's not easy to spread those resources around.
especially when you factor in the transportation challenges.
Like what?
Well, they often have to transport patients between the islands and the mainland.
Okay.
Then that means using ferries or air ambulances. It adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah. And I'm guessing communication can be a problem too.
Oh, yeah. Cell service isn't great in some of the more remote areas.
So they have to rely on radios and satellite phones?
Sometimes, yeah.
That makes things tricky.
It does, yeah.
And then on top of the geography, you've got the demographics.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, they have a large indigenous population,
Okay.
and many of them live in remote communities with limited access to healthcare.
So the EMS system is even more important in those areas.
Absolutely. It can be a lifeline.
So they have a big responsibility to make sure that everyone has access to care.
They do, yeah. And they've risen to the challenge.
How so?
Well, they've developed specialized programs,
Okay.
and they've built partnerships with indigenous communities.
So they're taking a proactive approach.
They are.
Okay, and let's not forget about the weather,
Oh, yeah. That can be a real wild card.
especially in a region with so many different landscapes.
Right. They get it all: snowstorms, ice storms, extreme heat.
So they have to be prepared for anything.
They do, yeah. They monitor the forecast really closely,
Okay.
and they adjust their staffing and resources accordingly.
So they might call in extra paramedics if a storm is coming,
Exactly. Or they might position ambulances strategically.
so they can still reach people.
Yep, they've got it covered.
And they have special vehicles for those tough conditions.
Oh, yeah. Four-wheel drive ambulances, snowmobiles, things like that.
So they can access those remote areas.
Exactly.
This is really impressive.
They're pretty resourceful.
And they work with other agencies too, right?
Yeah, like the OPP and the Ministry of Transportation.
So it's a team effort.
Absolutely. It's all about collaboration.
Now, one thing I've noticed is that they seem to really embrace technology.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely tech savvy.
Like they've got that electronic patient care reporting system.
The EPCR.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, basically it's a digital system that replaces the old paper-based records.
So instead of writing everything down on a clipboard, they use tablets or laptops.
Exactly.
Okay. And that makes things more accurate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's way easier to read a type report than someone's scribbles.
Especially in a high-stress situation.
Right, you don't want any misunderstandings.
And it allows for real-time data sharing.
Exactly. So the hospital can be ready for the patient before they even arrive.
That makes a lot of sense.
It streamlines everything.
And it's good for data analysis, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They can use that data to improve their performance.
So they're not just collecting data for the sake of it.
Nope. It's all about making things better.
Now, I've also heard that they're exploring telehealth technologies.
Especially in those remote areas.
Can you give me an example of how that would work?
Okay, imagine a paramedic in a remote community, and they encounter a patient with a really complex condition.
Okay.
Well, using telehealth, they can connect with a doctor at the base hospital.
Through video.
Exactly. They can show the doctor, the patient review vital signs, get advice on treatment.
So it's like having a virtual consultant right there in the ambulance.
Pretty much.
And they can even use telehealth for virtual consultations with patients.
In some cases, yeah.
So people can get medical advice without having to travel long distances.
Exactly. It's all about increasing access to care.
It's amazing how technology is breaking down those barriers.
It really is. They're really pushing the boundaries.
And on top of all the technology, we've got to talk about communication.
Right. That's the glue that holds everything together.
It's essential in EMS.
Absolutely.
So how does the Manitoulin Sudbury DSB make sure that their communication is seamless?
Well, they've got a really robust infrastructure.
Oh.
State-of-the-art dispatch center, multiple radio frequencies, backup systems in case of outages.
So they've got the hardware.
Yeah.
But what about the human side of things?
Well, they've got clear communication protocols that dictate how information should be shared.
So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And they prioritize training their staff in effective communication.
So they know how to use the systems and how to communicate clearly under pressure.
Absolutely. It's a critical skill in EMS.
And they collaborate with other agencies too, right?
Oh, yeah, the police, fire department, things like that.
So everyone's working together.
It's all about breaking down those silos.
But it goes beyond just emergency response, right?
That's right. They also use communication for community engagement.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Well, they're very active on social media.
Yeah.
They share information about their services safety tips. They even share stories about the impact they're having on the community.
It's a great way to connect with people.
Yeah, and they participate in community events, too.
So they're really getting out there.
They are. They understand that an informed community is a safer community.
Okay, now let's talk about their commitment to quality improvement.
Okay.
That seems to be a big part of their culture.
It is, yeah. They're always striving to get better.
So they're not just checking boxes.
Nope. It's ingrained in everything they do.
They have a dedicated quality assurance team, right?
They do, yeah. They monitor performance, identify areas for improvement, develop new strategies.
So they're constantly looking for ways to enhance patient care and efficiency.
That's the goal.
And they use a lot of different approaches, right?
Oh, yeah. They analyze data, they do performance audits, they look at patient satisfaction surveys.
They even do peer reviews.
Yeah, where paramedics review each other's cases.
So it's a very thorough process.
They don't miss a thing.
And they value feedback from their staff.
Absolutely. They know that the paramedics have valuable insights.
So it's a collaborative effort.
Everyone's working together to make the system better.
Now, one area where I know they've been focusing on improvement is response times.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So how do they track those?
They use GPS data from the ambulances,
Okay.
dispatch records, patient care reports.
So they have a lot of data to work with.
They do, yeah, and they analyze it regularly to see if there are any patterns or trends.
And then they use that information to make changes.
Exactly, like maybe they need to position ambulances differently,
Or streamline their dispatch protocols.
or even use different modes of transportation in certain cases.
So they're always adapting and evolving.
Gotta stay ahead of the game.
Now, I know we've talked about a lot of positive things,
Hmm.
but I think it's important to acknowledge that there are challenges too.
Of course, no system is perfect.
So besides the geography and the weather, what other obstacles do they face?
Well, the paramedic shortage is a big one.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
It's hitting rural areas especially hard.
And I imagine that puts a lot of strain on their resources.
It does, yeah, they're constantly juggling staffing levels.
Trying to make sure they have enough people to cover all the calls.
Exactly, and it can lead to longer wait times for patients.
Right. And more work for the paramedics who are already there.
It's a tough situation.
And then on top of the staffing challenges, they've got rising costs.
Yeah, healthcare is expensive.
And the patients are getting more complex.
It's a constantly evolving landscape.
So they have to be flexible and adaptable.
Absolutely. They're always looking for ways to improve their efficiency.
It's inspiring to see how they're handling all these challenges.
They're doing an amazing job.
And it makes you realize how important it is to support our EMS providers.
We often take them for granted.
But they're out there every day saving lives.
They're the real heroes.
So I think we should all give them a big thank you.
Absolutely, they deserve it.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, yes.
So let's wrap up this part of our exploration.
Sounds good.
And next time we'll delve into some final thoughts and insights.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so we're back, and we spent the last 2 parts really digging into this deployment plan.
We have.
And I gotta say, I am really impressed with what I've seen.
Me too.
Like the level of detail, the thought that's gone into it, it's remarkable.
Yeah, they haven't overlooked anything.
And they're not shying away from those bigger challenges either?
Nope. They're tackling them head on.
Like the paramedic shortage, the rising costs of healthcare, all that stuff.
They're not just sitting back and waiting for things to happen.
They're being proactive.
Exactly. And I think that's a big takeaway for our listeners.
What do you mean?
Well, the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB, they're a great example of how an EMS service can be adaptable,
Okay.
innovative. They're willing to change and evolve.
Right. They're not afraid to try new things.
Nope. And they're constantly looking for ways to improve.
So it's not about being perfect.
No, it's about striving for excellence.
And that's something that any organization can learn from.
Absolutely, regardless of what industry you're in.
But I think it's also important to remember the people.
Oh, for sure.
Like behind all the systems and the data, there are real people doing this work.
Absolutely.
The paramedics, the dispatchers, everyone.
They're the ones making a difference.
And they're doing it under some pretty tough conditions.
Yeah. Long hours, high stress, a lot of responsibility.
And it takes a toll.
It does. We have to acknowledge that.
So we need to make sure they're getting the support they need.
Absolutely. Both physically and emotionally.
So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the details. But at the end of the day, it's the people who are the real heroes.
Couldn't agree more.
They're the ones who are out there on the front lines saving lives.
And they do it with compassion and care.
Exactly. So we owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
We do.
So we talked about their commitment to safety.
Yeah.
But are there other things they're doing to support their paramedics?
Oh, yeah. They have a bunch of programs to support their mental and emotional health.
Like what?
Well, they have peer support programs, access to counseling services.
Okay.
And they're trying to create a culture where it's okay to talk about these things.
So it's not seen as a weakness.
Exactly. They're trying to break down that stigma.
That's really great to hear.
It is, yeah. They're really taking care of their people.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay, hit me.
What do you think are the most valuable lessons that other EMS services can learn from the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, first of all, I think they demonstrate the importance of planning.
Okay.
Like, they really think things through. They anticipate problems.
They're proactive.
Exactly. They don't wait for things to hit the fan.
And they're not afraid to embrace technology.
Nope. They're always looking for ways to use it to their advantage.
Whether it's EPCR or telehealth or GPS tracking.
Right. They're always innovating.
And lastly, but certainly not least, they value their people.
That's huge.
They know that their paramedics are their most important asset.
And they treat them accordingly.
So it's not just about systems and data.
It's about people.
And that's a lesson that any organization can learn from.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
I agree.
This has been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And I want to thank the folks at the Manitoulin-Sudbury DSB.
Yeah, they're doing amazing work.
They're an inspiration. So to all of you listening out there, thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed it.
And until next time, stay curious.